How have you mapped the trajectory of climate change over time, and what do we have to worry about right now?
Let me say, as politely as I can, that I actually don't like the phrase climate change. I don't particularly like the phrase climate change. It's too mild. Try climate catastrophe. If a giant oak tree is about to collapse on your house, you don't say that you are at risk of housing change. You say, holy shit, we're about to die, and we're going to do something about it real fast. We're at an oak tree tipping point for the House of Humanity right now. It is the biggest issue of our or any time. If the environmental catastrophe led by climate change, it's not the only one, isn't averted in the next few decades, nothing else that we progressives, egalitarians, and peaceniks care about is going to matter. In 2008, NASA's James Hansen and 7 other leading climate scientists predicted irreversible ice sheet and species loss if the planet's average temperature rose above 1 degree Celsius, as they said it would if carbon dioxide's atmospheric presence reached 450 parts per million. CO2 then was at 385. The only way to be assured of a livable climate, Hansen said, would be to cut back to 350, and here we are, 11 years later, past Hansen's 1 degree centigrade red line, and we've gotten there at 410, not 450. It is the highest level of CO2 saturation in 800,000 years, which was 600,000 years before the birth of Homo sapiens. United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tells us we are headed for 1.5 Celsius in a dozen years, and that failure to drastically slash carbon emissions between now and 2030 is certain to set off catastrophic developments. It says we're on pace for 4 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. That will mean a planet that is unlivable. We really don't know how quickly the existential threat may unfold. This, folks, is an experiment that's never been run. What do we have to worry about? Extinction. Literally extinction. A person born this year is scheduled to turn 81. Okay, just a little over life expectancy in 2100, when at the current greenhouse gassing pace, Antarctica will have melted, and the Amazonian rainforest will have long ceased to function as the lungs of the planet. The students that I teach at DePaul now, right now, in this present moment, face painful decisions about whether they want actually to become parents or not, amazingly enough.
You've written about the connections between climate change, or climate, how do you phrase it?
Catastrophe,
climate catastrophe, class inequity, and imperialism. What are those connections, and how is the intersectionality between these issues often overlooked?
You know, eco-Marxists like Jason Moore and John Bellamy Foster, among others, the late Joel Coble, are right about capitalism. It is a system not just of class disparity, but of class rule, the rule of the owners and the managers of capital. There are a number of environmental problems with capitalist class rule. The first one is that the owners and managers of capital don't care about anything other than accumulation and profit. They are systemically compelled to commodify anything and everything they can get their hands on. They have always been content to profit from slavery, from fascism, from mass incarceration, from endless war, and even now from turning the planet into a giant greenhouse gas chamber, a crime that frankly promises to make the Nazis look like small-time criminals. The second problem is that capital is constantly throwing masses of human beings out of livable wage employment, off of social safety nets, out of common lands and public schools and public housing, and the only so-called solution to the mass poverty that results from this constant, ongoing enclosure process that it's ever been able to offer is the promise of new jobs and investment outlets through ever more expansion and growth, which is an environmental disaster on numerous levels. The third problem is that Wall Street and Bond Street and LaSalle Street and the rest of the big financial streets and exchanges have huge fixed and sunken investments in a vast carbon industrial complex. They do not want to see that portfolio devalued by Homo sapiens choosing to survive by keeping fossil fuels in the ground. The fourth problem is that capital is inherently systemically opposed to and threatened by social, public, environmental planning on the scale required for the task of moving humanity off of fossil fuels onto renewable energy and also to more broadly sustainable environmental practices. Fifth, class rule regimes insulate their top decision makers from the worst environmental consequences of their growth systems, and by the time people living in ruling class bubbles begin to sense the existential threat to themselves, it's generally too late for them to do anything about it beyond crazy things like getting the Tesla guy to send them to Mars or downloading their consciousness into artificial intelligence computers sent on galaxies, sent on satellites to roam through the galaxies. On imperialism, why don't we, for time, because I'm getting a 5-minute thing right there, why don't we hit that in Q&A, because I'd like to go to those connections are a little less abstract and are easier to talk about, and I'd be happy to do that.
Sure. So, in conjunction, what effective solutions and political strategies do you have to offer for us?
Well, I'm sort of going to punt on that to some extent to the Q&A again, but there's a few points I definitely want to communicate in my time up here in this slot. And the first one of those is that there's a whole bunch of information out there to counter the standard cost and benefit arguments that we can't afford to undertake a national and global Green New Deal. That's bullshit. The technologies are now widely available and affordable, and by the way, green jobs do pay, will continue to pay better than do fossil fuel jobs. I have sources on that I'll be happy to share on all of that. This is Robert Pollan's wonderful book, Greening the Global Economy, which is full of very useful data that we need. Second, we can't afford not to make the transition. It's really darkly hilarious to hear center, corporate Democratic, and right-wing Republican commentators advance critical so-called cost-benefit analyses of the big, scary, terrible, totalitarian Green New Deal. Whatever you think of whether or not the Green New Deal is radical enough to get the job done, at least Green New Dealers are talking seriously about the benefit, imagine this, cost-benefit analysis of a livable Earth. It seems like we might want to absorb some real costs to continue as a species. It's a green cliche, but it's true. There are no jobs on a dead planet. There's no economy on a dead planet. Third, we need to be ready to talk about green jobs and what they can and do pay, and about how we will create social safety nets for fossil fuel sector workers if we want to sell environmental reconversion to we the people. The whole carbon capitalist right has propagated the notion that green transformation is a giant job killer. It is not, and we have to counter that claim in ways that show that we understand and care about the concerns of the working class majority. We need to be existentialists, not catastrophists. It's not about the crystal ball. We don't care if the betting line on green transformation is bad. Maybe it's 1 in 10, maybe it's better. It doesn't matter. The odds go to 0 in 10 if we don't take action. Let Vegas take the bets. We are in the field of action. Fifth, know your enemies. Climate just activists. If you think it's just the eco-fascist, climate-denying Republican Party, you are sadly mistaken. Yes, unlike the orange cracker, Obama did not deny climate change, but in the real world of power, Chicago's beloved 44 watered down global climate agreements and significantly expanded U.S. oil and gas output and infrastructure, something he actually bragged about at the Baker Institute right after the IPCC report came out last fall. I presume many of you have heard by now that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has put a blacklist on vendors who serve progressive Green New Deal candidates daring to challenge Democratic Party incumbents. Vote if you think it makes a difference, but don't drink the full Kool-Aid of American electoral fake representative politics. of American social movements become a gilet jaune or a gilet vert. Get your yellow vest on, and your green one, and your red one, and your black one. Learn how to build barricades, study civil disobedience. If you are waiting for some elite politician to fix this ecological mess, you will be hung out to dry well past humanity's expiration date.
Thank you so much. So our next panelist is Nancy Meza, who is the climate justice organizer at the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, or LaVejo.
Can you speak louder?
Yes. She was, is this better? Is this better? It could possibly be the microphone. Yeah, okay. Nancy Meza is the climate justice organizer. Is it better with the mic? Or is it worse with the mic? Okay, is this better? Worse? Better?
About the same.
Okay, I'm just going to talk really loud. So Nancy Meza is the climate justice organizer at the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, or LaVejo. She was born in Los Angeles, California, and from the age of 3 was raised in the Little Village neighborhood here in Chicago. Nancy was a youth leader and volunteer with LaVejo before becoming organizer. Now she leads the hashtag No Diesel campaign, educating community members on the harms of diesel pollution and engaging them in community science. So Nancy, what do you do for the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, and what is LaVejo's mission?
So I currently am organizing one side of the neighborhood. There is 38% of the land in Little Village is designated for industrial use. And it's worth it to know that in more than 25 years, our industrial corridor hasn't been looked at, hasn't been modified. And when it was created, there was no language around health or environment. As a consequence of that, we have an elementary school with about 1,000 children. It's overpopulated in the industrial corridor. When it was built on contaminated land. So it had to be, taken down and clean out the soil and rebuilt again. And because it's an industrial corridor, it's right behind Unilever, who's a multi-billionaire company that produces helmets in Little Village. And Little Village is actually the center, and all the mayonnaise from helmets gets distributed from our neighborhood. But the school is literally right next to it. They operate about 500 to 900 trucks a day, 7 days out of the week. We also have a park in our industrial corridor that used to be our facility site. It was heavily contaminated, but is now transformed into a park. We also have a high school in our industrial corridor, right next to industry. So children there are breathing really bad air. And when I first started, we knew the air was really bad, but we had no data to show it. We looked at the city's website. There was no information on how many trucks we were having in our neighborhood. So like she mentioned, we are using community science to collect our own data. So that's part of the work that I'm doing, collecting truck data, air quality data, and helping organize community members to hold these industries accountable, because they're multi-billionaire companies that can afford to put air filtration systems in the school, so that it's eliminating a little bit of the burdens that the students have there. So that's a little bit of the work that I do, and our mission is to organize with community members. A lot of the times when city comes into our neighborhood, they already have projects proposed for our neighborhood without necessarily asking people what they want to see in our neighborhood. So a lot of the times these beautification projects attract gentrification. So our work is to do door knocking and have conversations with community members, asking them, how are you doing? Is there anything, like what are your concerns? How can we work together to figure out what makes you feel safe in the neighborhood? So it's a lot of conversation, a lot of getting to know one another, and definitely meeting community members where they're at. Because in order for them to get involved, we have to make sure that their well-being is being considered first, so that they're healthy enough to want to be involved and be concentrated in the work that we're doing.
Environmental issues often cause the most harm to marginalized communities, as you discussed. So how do you make sure to take the intersectionality of these issues and different identities into account with your work at Lavejo?
Yeah, and I think we do that work, but we don't necessarily mention it. I mean, La Vida is predominantly Mexican and immigrant community, so whenever we do workshops or meetings, just the basic stuff, we have to take into consideration language, access, materials. So what we do at Alvejo is we make sure that the content that we are teaching or informing them about is in Spanish, with language that is accessible, that isn't technical, because even I have a hard time reading documents that have a lot of technical words. I'm like, what is this? So making sure that the content that we're out there talking about is accessible. Access to the meetings, doing outreach and figuring out childcare. So a lot of these things is it's the small details that really make the difference, right? Because if we're doing outreach to a family and they can come because they have to feed their children, or they have children that are might be playing and they're not concentrating. So we provide childcare. We provide, if we're taking up community's time, we want to honor it by feeding them. If we're taking up more than an hour, we make sure that we have food because we don't know if this family has eaten. We don't know what they've been through. So just like doing the most basic things to make sure that they're able to participate.
So you've talked a lot about community, and grassroots and community organizing come with many rewards and challenges. What do you find is the most challenging aspect of your work, and how do you address it and overcome it?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges when I first started doing door knocking and asking people, I was doing organizing for a park and asking them what they would like to see in the park. Most of the times people were shocked that we were asking them what their thoughts were. Because like I said, when projects come in, they just come into our neighborhood with already an agenda. So I think some of the most challenging is people understanding the power that they have. Because we are a low-income immigrant community, a lot of the times people are hesitant because they're not used to people asking them how they are, what do you need. And a lot of times it takes more than one visit to their homes so that they're able to understand that their voice has power. And even if they're not able to vote, they can come to these hearings and make their voices heard. And it's a challenge because I think we grow up not being asked what we want. So it takes conversations to even get that conversation started.
Yes, and to end this on a positive note, what has been your biggest success at Lavejo, and what can you teach us about finding and implementing solutions to these dire issues?
One of our biggest successes was definitely shutting down the Crawford Coal Power Plant in 2012. That was huge for us. It was a 15-year fight, and I think it was a success. And some of the challenges is that and it was a great victory. We celebrated. And for a little while, we were kind of okay. We said, our air quality is going to be so much better. And we took a little break celebrating that victory and honoring it. But, there's always new challenges coming by. And if y'all hadn't heard, Hilco, which is a company that looks at brownfield sites, so sites that have been abandoned by industry and are usually contaminated, Hilco comes into these sites, cleans them up and makes them nice and shiny for new manufacturing logistics centers. So they currently bought the site. So we are once again fighting because this coal power plant produced CO2 and it was killing a lot of our community folks. So the plan for that site was to have a just transition. So whatever project we wanted to be there, community envisioned it, and whatever it was no longer supposed to be harming us or killing us. But Hilco bought that site and they're trying to bring in 100 million square feet logistics center, calling it last mile distribution. So once again, we're activated, and just like CO2, diesel pollution, when you see the black smoke coming out of those trucks, it's particularly matter 2.5 And because of its size, it's so tiny, it can go into people's lungs easier and cause many lung issues, respiratory issues. And I think that for us, self-care is really important because a lot of times we are always on defense mode and emergency mode. We have to take the time to take care of ourselves, and if that means taking a break and then coming back, I think it's something that us as an environmental justice community and activists really have to prioritize that, because we understand the burnout that happens of the years of organization work that we've been doing, but always working with new leaderships of how can we get the youth involved so they're able to take over after us. So always having opportunities for growth and leadership in our organization.
Great, thank you so much. It's been so amazing. We're going to go ahead and get our Q&A session started. So if you guys have questions, go ahead and make lines up in the aisle so that we can sort of make this a joint effort, get everybody together. So if you have questions, we do have a limited amount of time, like 10-15 minutes, so try to keep them as brief as possible.
And we're going to try to go with 10 minutes because we are behind schedule. So you can keep under 20-second question, only questions. We'll try to get as many as possible. Yes, whatever side.
Cool. Thank you so much to the panel. My name is Ben Peterson. I represent a climate activist organization called Extinction Rebellion here in Chicago. Still can't hear? Is this on? Yes. Hi, my name is Ben. I represent a climate activist organization. We're international. We're called Extinction Rebellion. If you have any questions, we have 2 more representatives back there. My question is for anybody on the panel. One of the biggest issues that I come up against when I'm trying to organize and inspire people about the climate crisis is an inherent skepticism and cynicism coming back about the
I'm sorry.
Apologies. There's an inherent skepticism and cynicism when you try to approach somebody about this issue and the severity of the issue, and I'm wondering about any strategies that any one of you 3 have found to be effective to kind of break through that skepticism and cynicism.
Try to answer, but I haven't.
I think that I have that same problem. And hearing from Nancy speak, unfortunately, I sometimes think you have to experience it until you can understand it. I can say that with my privilege, I've only learned about these things in a formal education setting, not from a first-hand experience. And I think I don't want people to have to experience it to understand it. But again, I have this same problem, so I don't think I'm answering very well.
Sometimes I notice we get accused, people who just cite basic earth science data that's like consensus opinion, get accused of catastrophism, and it sort of drives me crazy. And I always say to folks on that, if you went into, or an older relative went into, and you get a diagnosis, people get diagnoses, I'm getting older, I'm going to get a diagnosis one day, we all get them. Would you melt down and freak out and accuse the doctor of being a catastrophist? So what are you talking about? No, you'd find out, you'd work up a health plan, one way, shape, or form, and try to do your best you can to be as healthy as you can, live as long as humanly possible. And it's a pretty good analogy. Quite frankly, what the earth scientists are saying is that it's the diagnosis. Sorry, it's reality. A lot of people are stuck in the stages of grief right now, and a lot of them are in denial, and they're in anger, and they've got to work through it. They have to mourn what has happened to the earth. It's extremely essential to mourn. The old Joe Hill slogan, I loved it, don't mourn, organize. Forget about it. I don't want to be organized by anyone that does not mourn. We have to deal with what really is happening. We have to start in the Buddhist aphorism where we really are. The other thing is jobs. it's very important to tell people that this green program that we're for actually is very good economically. People will not be wiped out economically by a green transformation. Actually, it's full of opportunity for all of us.
I don't think I've ever met someone like that has that kind of passion, but I think when we do our organizing, a lot of the thing is it's like bad news. But then we bring in the solutions because we don't want people to walk away like, I'm gonna die. You know, there are solutions that we have in place that our people have. I mean, we have the solutions to the problems that have been placed upon us. We'll always make sure that we are also lifting up solutions to that because we don't want people to be freaking out and not knowing what to do when we know what to do. We just need to activate our community folks.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
I'm curious how the degrowth and Buena concepts can be applied.
Louder.
I'm curious how the degrowth and Buena concepts can be applied along with environmental action at the neighborhood level to, like what has been applied, what do you recommend to be applied in the case of a former site of a coal plant?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase your question?
These concepts of degrowth and Buena and the environmental activism, how do we apply those, or how are those being applied on the neighborhood level in Little Village or just in general in places where there's been a coal-fired electric plant? What do you do with that? If it's not going to be a park, if it's not going to be logistics center, it still is in the city, it still is in your neighborhood.
As I talked about Buena and degrowth. So another movement is the Just Transition movement that is happening in the United States with some Native Americans and other cultures. So the exact idea of something like degrowth and Buena Just Transition is that it is an alternative and a rejection of westernization of how we find solutions. So I talked about our typical market style solutions and technological solutions to attack environmental problems. And when I was listening to Nancy speak, when she said about fighting the Hillco, the logistics center going into the old coal plant, I see that as a perfect opportunity to begin exposing these other movements like Just Transition and showing how there are new ways to develop, and we can't have our narrow viewpoint of what it means to develop.
Yeah, I think for us, we have all these industries in our neighborhood, and it's really hard to tackle them one by one. It's like little fires. But specific with the Hillco site, that land had already been re-envisioned. 60% of all food vendors they all see in the streets come from Little Village. So we already have the knowledge of agriculture and how can we change the narrative of what kind of industry can look like in our neighborhood, and really pushing for projects and industry that speak to the culture of our neighborhood, right? So we speak about like urban agriculture, what could that look like in our industrial site, so that we're not attracting industry that's only going to be polluting us, but how are we also, giving our community members jobs. Currently in our industrial corridor, only 4% of people from the neighborhood have access to those jobs, and that's not a very high number. And that can also attract gentrification. So we have models in place to keep our neighborhood the way it is, but also how can we envision it so that we're promoting healthy jobs, and what do those jobs look like? Because I think a lot of our obstacles are that people need these jobs, and they take these temporary jobs, and they take away their wages. They don't have any benefits, And when we understand that, right? But how can we turn that conversation into, well, what does a healthy job look like? And how can we push these industries for our community members to have job trainings to access those jobs?
Such a great point.
Thank you for making that point. Here is our next question.
Paul, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Paul, I was fascinated by something you said about the Elon Musk crowd capturing their consciousness in a computer, apparently, and putting it on a satellite and roaming the universe. I was wondering how do they think they're going to do that? And if you could elaborate a little more on
Well,
that.
that's just crazy. I actually saw a piece on Medium, I don't remember the names, a couple months ago by some, math computer genius, and he was brought out to one of these sort of, genius think tank types of discussions, and he thought that it was going to be the usual thing that he did. I think it was in Aspen or something like that, the millionaire show. And he thought he was going to be brought into an audience and there'd be, like 500 people out there and he was going to give a TED Talk type of thing. And it turned out they were paying him, he said, more money than he'd ever had for one speaking engagement than he'd ever had in his life. And it was just 5 hedge fund billionaires. And they were asking him about his ecological projections and all of this kind of stuff. And all the questions were about well, how the hell can we figure out how to create a little escape for ourselves? Literally, just for themselves. And one of them was even asking him about precisely that. There's the fantasy of colonizing other, believe it or not, like everyone see the movie They Live, the John Carpenter classic, the intergalactic, capitalists. They actually, in that movie, they warmed Earth and then they had to get away from it. But that was one thing that was brought up. Can we download our consciousness? So I was just kind of riffing off of that, but that's where that comes from.
Okay, we just have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to take one more question and then we're going to wrap this panel up.
Zero waste energy. Should that work along with clean environment? Anyone?
Oh, well, listen, energy savings is absolutely critical. Yeah, no, I mean, it's about, what is it, about 1/3 facilities, 1/3 transportation, and 1/3 industry. And I've been living in Iowa City for years where these, and I've been back in Chicago for the last few months, and it was just hideous the way the GOP, the white nationalist, eco-fascist GOP got a hold of Des Moines and just wiped out energy efficiency as a policy. It cut all these funds for the University of Iowa. The University of Iowa did all these heroic things with the structures they built. They weren't just gold, they were platinum, I'm having a Trump moment here, platinum, LEED certified buildings, and it's just, shining monuments to the best way you could build buildings. Now they're like, screw that, we don't care about that anymore. The Republicans are in, and not a big fan of Democrats, but Republicans are worse on this issue. So yeah, it matters, big time.
Okay, let's give them one more